I didn't even anticipate that he would take it upon himself. I can't recall the last time I experienced this feeling, secure, cozy, desired. Perhaps not at all. The pregnancy arrived unexpectedly. Yet the betrayal cut deeper. Peter's rejection and his abrupt departure created an immense emptiness in my life, a gap I wasn't certain I could ever bridge. I had anticipated confusion, anger. Perhaps even resentment, but never total abandonment. Not from the one who once vowed to love me through it all. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his expression inscrutable. I had nodded, preparing myself for his response. Peter inhaled deeply, his hands gliding over his face before settling on his hips. He gazed at the floor for an extended period, as though the solution to all questions resided in the frayed carpet beneath us. And then, just like that, he gazed at me with eyes I no longer recognized. "I can't do this, Susie." That was the final remark he made before he exited. "There will be no discussion." Without a doubt. No worry for what would come next. Initially, I reassured myself that he would return. He was simply overwhelmed. Perhaps, after a while, he would come to the door, admit he had erred, and suggest that we could navigate our way through it together. Yet, time continued to move forward. Then weeks. The ring he abandoned remained undisturbed on the dresser. A chilling reminder of all that I had lost. I ought to have crumbled. Perhaps I would have if it weren't for Colin. My son had always stood apart. From a young age, he possessed a subtle resilience, a steadfast loyalty that distinguished him from his peers. He had never been one for empty chatter. But when he spoke, he meant every syllable. As he settled me into my seat that evening, his hands planted decisively on the table, his gaze unwaveringly fixed on mine, I realized he wasn't speaking merely to soothe my feelings. He assured me that I wasn't alone in this. "I will look after you." I exhaled unsteadily, my fingers quivering around the mug I grasped. "Colin, you need not say a word." His voice remained unwavering, composed. "I simply want you to be aware of that." And he truly meant it. From that moment forward, he was present. Initially, I attempted to assert that I was okay, that I could handle things by myself. However, Colin refused to allow me. Initially, he focused on minor details. Bringing me tea in the morning before I even got out of bed, ensuring I ate even when my appetite had vanished. He accompanied me to every doctor's appointment. Sitting next to me in the waiting room, his knee gently bobbed up and down. His fingers drummed softly against his thigh, creating a rhythm that brought me comfort. More than I was willing to acknowledge. The initial moment he laid eyes on the baby displayed on the ultrasound screen, he let out a sharp breath. His grip firmed around my hand. "She's real," he murmured, almost to himself. The physician beamed. "She is." Colin looked at me then. His expression was gentler than I had ever witnessed. "Susie is truly beautiful." In that instant, I perceived. There was a spark in his gaze that caused my heart to falter. A sense of pride and unexpected love, and a quiet devotion that took me by surprise. Perhaps Peter's departure was a hidden blessing, due to Colin's decision to remain, and in a manner that was truly significant. It wasn't solely the doctor's appointments. It was all-encompassing. On those days when exhaustion took over, Colin stepped in to prepare dinner. Basic items to start: grilled cheese, scrambled eggs, toast. However, he began to put in more effort. Searching for recipes and experimenting. Various dishes that bring a smile to my face. "I made pasta," he announced one evening, placing a plate in front of me. I stared at it, then at him. "Pasta was made by you." He smiled, massaging the nape of his neck. "All right, I cooked the pasta and poured sauce over it. However, it is consumable." I chuckled, genuinely chuckled. For the first time in weeks. And then, in an instant, everything changed. Initially, it wasn't clear. It was in the subtle details. The way he observed me when he believed I was unaware. He uttered my name, gentle and deliberate, as if it were something invaluable. Colin had never referred to me as Mom. Not since he was a young child. It began as a peculiar habit in his youth. He had just chosen up on my name before the word Mom ever stuck, and somehow it just became routine. It never bothered me. In a sense, it always fostered a feeling of teamwork between us. As if we were partners navigating life together. Yet now, each time he uttered my name, it sent a shiver racing down my spine. Susie, it's important for you to take a break. Susie. Allow me to assist you. Susie, you look absolutely stunning today. The final one truly took me by surprise. I had been standing in front of the mirror, applying lotion over the curve of my belly, my oversized sweater drapes loosely off my frame. My skin was transforming, my body expanding, and I had been experiencing distinct. Colin entered, pausing in the doorway. His gaze lingered on me, deliberate and contemplative. And then he had uttered it. You appear stunning. I turned to him, startled, scanning his face for any hint of jest. Yet there was nothing. Simply calm assurance. A warmth had spread through me, something unfamiliar, something perilous. For the first time in years, I felt acknowledged. And that frightened me more than anything. I attempted to overlook it. The way he gazed at me. The way his hand lingered as he assisted me in rising from the couch. He always appeared to be near. His presence is a steady anchor, stabilizing me, preventing me from unraveling. But at night, when the house was still, when the heaviness of my solitude bore down on me. Ribs. I just couldn't get it out of my mind. Contemplating him was incorrect. It was inevitable. Colin was my child. But then, why did it seem so different now? What caused my heart to race when he touched me? What was it about being in his embrace that made me feel secure in a way I had never experienced with Peter? I conveyed. It was merely hormones. The profound sense of appreciation for having someone who chose to stay by my side. Yet, beneath the surface, I understood it was something greater. I found myself at a loss. Unsure of the next step to take. Colin was perpetually present. In every moment of my weakness, he stood unwaveringly strong. Whenever I hesitated, he remained unwavering. He had transformed into my foundation, my unwavering presence, my all. It began with small details. The way his hands hesitated as he assisted me in rising. The way his voice took on a gentle quality when he uttered my name. Then there were the nights when weariness enveloped me, and he tenderly kneaded my sore feet. His fingers were strong, yet gentle. Do you enjoy that? He whispered one evening as I sank into the couch, my swollen ankles supported in his gentle grasp. I released a measured exhale, allowing my head to tilt backward. Absolutely, yes. He laughed softly, his fingers digging into the aching muscles. I believe you would benefit from allowing me to look after you more. You already do, I whispered. My eyes fluttering shut. I ought to have intervened. I should have told him to stop looking at me like that, touching me like that. However, I was unable to. Every touch enveloped me in warmth. Each word resonated with a sense of security. And I had spent such an eternity in solitude. Colin kept his gaze fixed on me. His gaze remained unwavering, brimming with an unspoken depth I wasn't prepared to identify. One night, as I lay in bed, grappling with the search for a comfortable position, I sensed the bed dip beside me. I turned my head, anticipating to find concern etched on his face. Instead, there was an underlying essence, something more profound. "Susie," he whispered, his fingers gliding over my abdomen. "Am I able to?" I swallowed hard, nodding in agreement. He bent down and gently pressed his lips to my stomach, so tender, so respectful, that my breath hitched in my throat. "You're incredibly resilient," he murmured softly against my skin. "Absolutely stunning." My fingers quivered as they glided through his hair, sensing the warmth of his breath upon my skin. Colin gazed up at me then. His eyes were shadowed by a depth I couldn't bear to dismiss. He pressed his lips to my forehead, lingering for a moment that felt like an eternity. I ought to have expressed something. I ought to have told him to stop. Yet, I chose to shut my eyes and allow myself to experience. When the nurse suggested a parenting class, I almost burst out laughing right in front of her. "I had already raised one child," I said, shifting uncomfortably on the examination table. "I believe I have a clear understanding of my actions." He offered a warm smile. "This time feels different. Doesn't it? Having support is truly beneficial." I nearly confessed to her that I was empty-handed. Peter had gone, and here I was, facing this alone. However, I wasn't solitary. Colin was with me. When he proposed that we go together, I readily accepted. Curiosity led me to say as we stepped into the community center. "Certainly," he responded with ease. His hand lingered gently on my lower back. The room was brimming with pairs. Primarily young couples. Thrilled, anxious, radiating with that undeniable fresh parent vibe. They shared laughter, intertwined their fingers and exchanged whispers as the instructor spoke. Colin pulled out a chair for me before settling in beside me, our knees lightly touching. Initially, I didn't give it much thought. Then the instructor smiled at us and said, "How wonderful it is to witness partners embarking on this journey together." I tensed up. I opened my mouth to correct her. To tell her that Colin was my son, not my companion. However, Colin got there before I did. He smiled, intertwining his fingers with mine. "Indeed, it truly is." Stilled. He held on tightly. And even worse, I didn't pull away. Throughout the remainder of the class, the instructor addressed us as though we were in a romantic relationship. She offered guidance on co-parenting, on providing support during sleepless nights, and on maintaining romance even after the arrival of the baby. Each time she spoke of love, Colin tightened his grip on my hand just a bit more. As we stepped out into the night air, my mind was a whirlwind. "Colin," I said, freeing my hand. "They believed we were a couple." His lips curled into a subtle smile. "I understand." I gazed at him, anticipating a chuckle to diffuse the tension. However, he chose not to. Instead, he moved in closer, his fingers lightly grazing my cheek. "Susie," he murmured gently, his tone unwavering. "Why not?" I gulped. "Why not instead of what? Why not give it a shot? And blink?" "Colin, you seem to be mistaken in your understanding. I'm past the point of being your match. Please refrain from saying that." His voice held a steady resolve now, his hands clasping mine tightly. "You're not too old. You're not lacking in any way." I shook my head, attempting to pull away, but he held firm, refusing to let me go. Susie paid attention to me. His voice was heavy with feeling. "Adore you. I cherish you, and I adore this little one. And I desire for us to be a family." I opened my mouth. Yet silence enveloped me. "I'll nurture her as my own," he continued. His grip tightened, as though he feared I might vanish. "I will cherish you, and I will cherish her for all the days of my life. Allow me to take care of this. Allow me to look after you." Tears seared behind my eyes. This was not meant to occur. He was my child. Yet, when I gazed upon him, he was no longer just a boy in my eyes. A moon remained in sight. A moon who had arrived when others had not. A moon who cherished me profoundly, with all his heart. In a manner I had never experienced love before. My lips quivered. "Colin, are you certain?" His thumb. I wiped away the solitary tear that had fallen down my cheek. I have never felt more certain about anything in my life. I released a trembling breath. My heart raced within me. My thoughts were shouting at me to refuse, to express how absurd this was. That we simply couldn't proceed. But then he leaned down, pressing his forehead against mine. "Simply give it a go," he murmured. Kindly. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to entertain the thought. I allowed my mind to wander and envision what it might be like to belong to him. To experience love in such a profound way. To find companionship once again. Instead of pulling away, I chose to close my eyes. And allow myself to descend. I am uncertain about the moment it occurred. Perhaps it was how Colin always seemed to understand my needs before I even voiced them. Perhaps it was how he always stayed close to me. His hands were always there to steady me, to hold me. To remind me I wasn't alone. Perhaps it was the way he gazed at me, as if I were something invaluable, something deserving of admiration. Yet, at some moment, without even being aware of it, I found myself falling in love. Not with the thought of him. Not with the reality that he was the sole one who remained. However, with Colin himself. With his warmth. His subtle power. His unwavering commitment, his steadfast allegiance, his deep affection. And the most unfortunate aspect. I was completely unaware that it was unfolding. The first time we kissed, truly kissed. I was the one who initiated it. The hour was late, well past midnight, and sleep eluded me. My back throbbed, and my legs felt heavy and swollen. No matter how I adjusted myself in bed, comfort eluded me. I let out a soft sigh, my hand gliding over my belly. The baby nudged gently, almost as if it could feel my irritation. A soft knock echoed at my bedroom door. "Susie." Colin's voice was soft, deliberate. "Are you awake?" I ought to have advised him to return to his slumber. I ought to have sent him away. Yet, I softly beckoned, "Enter." The door creaked open, revealing him, poised in the soft shadows of the hallway. His hair was tousled from sleep. His gaze weighed down by worry. "Are you all right?" he inquired, moving in closer. I exhaled gently, allowing my head to sink into the softness of the pillow. "I simply cannot find rest." He nodded then, without a moment's pause. He perched on the edge of the bed. "What is it that you require?" I nearly revealed nothing to him. I nearly acted as if everything was okay. But I was far too weary to pretend. "Susie." I thought he would pause. I thought he would point out that this wasn't typical. We never intended for things to turn out this way. Yet, he chose not to. He just nodded, sliding under the blankets next to me. For a moment, we simply rested there, the quiet expanding around us. His body radiated warmth next to mine, firm and unwavering. And for the first time that night, I sensed a freedom in my breath. Then, softly, Colin reached for me. His fingers glided over my cheek, traveled down my arm, and finally rested on my belly. He traced slow, deliberate circles against my skin. His touch sent shivers racing down my spine. "She is in motion," he whispered. I nodded, shutting my eyes. "She consistently shifts when I find myself unable to rest. It feels as if she understands." Colin laughed softly, his breath warm against my hair. "She already has a bit of a spark." Grinned. "She inherits that from me." "I love her, Susie," he whispered, his voice heavy with feeling. "I already adore her immensely. I turned my head then, gazing up at him. His face was near. So close I could see the way his eyelashes flickered in the dim light, the way his lips parted slightly as he exhaled. And before I could hold back, before I could consider my actions, I kissed him. Initially, it had a gentle quality. Merely a fleeting touch of lips, tentative and uncertain. However, he then replied. His hand gently cradled my jaw. His thumb glided over my cheek as he intensified the kiss. His lips were warm and gentle, yet there was an additional layer beneath the surface. Something urgent. Something unrefined. There was an unmistakable sense that he had been anticipating this moment. He desired this just as intensely as I did. As we finally drew apart, we found ourselves both gasping for air. I scanned his face, anticipating a sign of remorse. Anticipating the pause. Yet, all I perceived was affection. You don't have to say anything, he whispered softly. His forehead pressed softly against mine. There's no need for you to make any promises to me. However, simply share with me that you experienced it. I gulped. Contact me. Share it with me, he murmured. His lips grazed my temple. Assure me that I'm not alone in this. I was unable to deceive him. I was unable to deceive myself. Thus, I murmured the sole truth I possessed. You are not. From that night forward, everything transformed. I ceased to resist it. I ceased to feign that what we shared was anything other than what it truly was. I allowed him to embrace me. I allowed him to kiss me. I allowed him to love me in a way that no one ever had before. And, oh how I loved him in return. I cherished how he cared for me, the way he spoke to my belly, sharing stories of his day with our daughter as if she could comprehend every word. I adored how he always seemed to understand my needs before I even voiced them. Be it a cup of tea, a soothing foot massage, or simply the comfort of someone holding me when the burdens of life grew overwhelming. I adored how he softly spoke my name, how his gaze made me feel like I was the center of his universe. I adored him. I cherished him deeply. I cherished him deeply. And I was completely unaware until it was far too late. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, his hands resting over my belly. When he looked at me with that quiet intensity that always made my breath catch. You're contemplating something, he whispered. I swallowed, glancing down at the way our fingers wove together over my stomach. You are on my mind. He grinned. Positive reflections. I let out a gentle chuckle. Perplexing reflections. Colin's fingers gently lifted my chin, compelling me to lock eyes with him. Susie, please share with me. I paused. For if I voiced it, there would be no retracting it. However, perhaps I didn't wish to reclaim it. I love you, I whispered. Colin moved on quietly. For a long moment, he simply gazed at me, his breath shallow, his fingers tightening around mine. Then, it came so softly that I nearly missed it. He murmured, repeat it once more. My throat felt constricted, and my chest was heavy with discomfort. Nonetheless, I expressed it regardless. I cherish you deeply. A gradual, stunning smile unfolded on his face. And then, before I could utter another word, he pressed his lips against mine. Profound and measured. Brimming with all that we had yet to articulate. As he finally withdrew, his hands gently cupping my face. He murmured. You've got no clue how long I've been waiting to hear you say that. I released a trembling breath, resting my forehead against his. We're going to be okay, Susie, he murmured, his thumb gently brushing against my cheek. I assure you that we will be all right. For the very first time in my life, I found myself believing him.